Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Unscripted History, where today I will be giving you a very simplified version of the history of the country of Monaco. So the history kind of starts off in 1191 when Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI ultimately ends up bestowing a land grant unto the Republic of Genoa, and in 1215 they ultimately end up recognizing this land, which was the land of Monaco, as a colony. So time kind of progresses, and ultimately we come to our protagonist of the Monacan story, which is the House Grimaldi. So the Grimaldi are a house that live in Monaco, and they predominantly rule it for the rest of this history. So in 1297, we see as Francesco Grimaldi, known as Malizia, or the malicious one, or the cunning one. And he was most certainly the cunning one. So what he did was he put on some Scooby-Doo disguises, disguising as Franciscan friars, and went up to the fortress that the Republic of Genoa had on the Rock of Monaco, and just took over the place. He put on, like I said, some Scooby-Doo attire. I imagine he was like lurking around, creeping like this with his homies, going to take over a rock dressed as a friar. But yeah, ultimately they successfully took the Rock of Monaco, and they kind of lived on their own, did their own thing for a while, until ultimately in the late 1300s, Spain ultimately took, or not Spain, but the crown of Aragon, the kingdom of Aragon, takes the land that is Monaco. And if you watched my previous video on the Kingdom of Sardinia, at least the early part of the history, then you will know this little connection here. But yeah, so we see that ultimately they I guess kind of explain why I was talking about the crown of Aragon, and it's because the Republic of Genoa had reacquired the area of Monaco at some point, and ultimately Genoa lost Monaco in their fight against the Aragonese. So it's kind of just a family squabble, really, because Monaco has technically always been Genoan up to this point, because the Grimaldi family is a Genoan family. So it's kind of just a family feud, a little bit of a squabble and all that. So ultimately, get to the point, the area of Monaco is lost to the Aragonese. And so we do see, though, after this time, that they are able to acquire some massive land gains. So we see between the years of 1346 and 1355 that the Monacans ultimately are able to claim the lands or annex lands of Menton, well, these are really towns, of Menton and Roquebrune. Roquebrune. So they are able to acquire Roquebrune, and this ultimately, and Menton, and this ultimately expands their land size by 10 times. Like, they grow massive. And that's not necessarily massive, they're still tiny, but they grow substantially larger than they were just off these acquisitions. So then, like, the next major thing that happens is in 1419, we see ultimately as the Grimaldi family purchases their independence from the crown of Aragon and become their own thing once more. Now, the next major thing we see is in 1612, when Henri II begins to bestow himself the title of, he's a Grimaldi as well, bestows himself the title of Prince of Monaco. And then, once again, with Henri II, we see as he does another major thing in his reign 30 years down the line, when he ultimately ends up meeting up with Louis XIII of France, who he had been in cahoots with a little bit, and agrees with them to make the area of Monaco a vassal state, a protectorate of the Kingdom of France. So they predominantly did this to help ward off Spanish attacks, because Monaco by itself would not be able to, I guess, hold off the Spanish attacks. However, with the assistance of France and the protection of France, they could. So this was a very strategic move on the part of Henri Garibaldi II. Not Garibaldi, Grimaldi. Garibaldi's Italian history. But yeah, so we see this, and I guess the next very large thing that happens is just kind of the progression of the years. We see it, they continue to remain a protectorate under the assistance of France for many years. And the cool thing during this area of, I guess, protectorateship, if that's a word, vassalship, is they get to maintain their sovereignty and autonomy. They get to essentially act as a separate country, just under the protection of the French. It's more so an alliance, though France isn't really getting anything out of it, so that's why it's a protectorate situation. But yeah, so we see that they maintain this protectorate status until 1739, when, if you know French history, French Revolution is going on, and ultimately Monaco is absorbed into the French Empire and conquered until 1814, when obviously the Napoleonic Wars end, and we then see the Congress of Vienna. Now, it became autonomous for a little bit after 1814, but then the Congress of Vienna in 1815, well, not necessarily autonomous, but like separate until 1815 when we have the Congress of Vienna. And hey, if you know your Sardinian history once more, the Kingdom of Sardinia acquires the area of Monaco. And so they become a protectorate under the Kingdom of Sardinia. Now, this remains in place for a while as well. We see as it stays this way until 1860 when the Treaty of Turin happens. And with this Treaty of Turin, we see as then the Kingdom of Sardinia ultimately has to remove its forces from Genoa, and France kind of steps in once more to act as a protector state of, not Genoa, but Monaco. If I've been saying Genoa throughout all this, I apologize. It's Monaco. I'm talking about the lands of Monaco. And Treaty of Turin, like I said, sees the Kingdom of Sardinia leave Monaco. And then France once more steps in to protect them. But yeah, so with this, we then see as they kind of remain in place for a little while, and we eventually draw on 1861, where stuff kind of starts to go bad for the area of Monaco for a little bit. And so we see as the people of the towns of Menton and Roquebrune, who had been previously two of the largest land gains for Monaco, and like I said, multiply their land size by 10, they ultimately start to get a little bit, I guess, unsettled, a little bit weary of heavy taxation. So they're like, you know what? We want separation. We want annexation. No, we don't want annexation. Oh my gosh. We want secession. We do not, oh my goodness, we no longer wish to be a part of the country of Monaco. So they end up revolting and separating, becoming the free cities of Menton and Roquebrune. So then they did this kind of in an attempt to ultimately become a protectorate of the Kingdom of Sardinia once more, because I guess they just saw the benefits of it more. However, France did not really want this, because in doing so they lost the land essentially, because like I said, Monaco was a protectorate of theirs. But it ultimately ends up happening anyways, and we then see as we come to the I'm about to butcher this word, I believe it's Monagasque Treaty of 1861, in which we see as Monaco ultimately ends up paying France 4.1 million francs for this, I guess, blunder essentially. However, the French also recognize Moroccan sovereignty after this. So Monaco becomes its own thing while also paying the French kind of a leaving fee, like divorce fees essentially. But yeah, that's kind of the major portions of the history of Monaco up to 1861. So yeah, it was just a kind of a short history to learn about, but it was kind of goofy too, with like the stuff that happened with Francesco Grimaldi early on, and it was surprisingly like anticlimactic considering how much of a contested area that was. However, Monaco wasn't really ever the focus of it. It was always the larger countries which held Monaco, like with Sardinia owning it, with Genoa owning it for a time. So yeah, it was just, there's a lot of conflict going on in that area, but Monaco didn't suffer too much from it because most of the time it had a big brother who was protecting it. So yeah, that was just kind of an interesting little history I wanted to read up on, because I've been reading around Mediterranean, Italian peninsula area history, and that's all there really is for that. Like I said, that little brief history, nothing too complex. You can always read deeper into it, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of an appetizer to whet your palate until you can look a little bit more into Moroccan history. But yeah, also, one major thing I forgot to mention is a later event past 1861. So we see this, they have to pay off a lot of money here. However, they start to make a lot more money in 1869, though here, this is actually another cessation of, not cessation of income for them, because they stop, I guess, executing an individual income tax on each of their citizens. So they did this because, I mean, they didn't really have to, but it was also to lure more people in, because they were making plethoras of money off their casinos. They were gambling out the wazoo and people were eating it right up. So they did this to lure wealthy people in, because, you know, if wealthy people love anything besides money, it's evading taxes. So they were like, you know what, let's come here, not pay taxes, and gamble, which is a phenomenal lifestyle. But yeah, so that's all there really is for the history of Monaco. I know most people probably don't even know where Monaco is on the map, or they just know Monaco for that scene in Iron Man 2. But yeah, like I said, that's all there really is for that, and thank you very much for watching.